In this video, I'm going to take a look at getting started with the results. And to do that, we're just going to step back 1 second to go back to our whole report. So I filled in a few bits of the introduction. So obviously these would need to be fleshed out into full paragraphs or several paragraphs depending on the nature of your report. There was a big ship that sank. We know that women and children were saved first. Does passenger class also matter, say, for survival? And then that leads us to a research question. So sometimes it's helpful to map this out, but I wouldn't actually include this as a report. That just should all be part of the research statement. And you will find that in many papers there is one sentence which is the aim of the research, and then there's more to the paragraph where they explain more about what's going on. So it's possible that this one sentence could actually be part of a whole paragraph. In order to work out what we need to show in the results, we have to think a little bit about what would you want to know if you were being presented with some data. So part of that is in the methods, but that also leads into our results. So let's quickly fill in some of these bits here. So we have an historical data set. I can't spell. And we could explain more about how this data was collected just to make it clear that, or I guess to explain what gaps there might be in the data. It's a kind of a unique case because I think the historians were trying to capture everyone that was on the Titanic. So it's not like we really need to talk about the sampling, and it's not an intervention, so we don't have any allocation. And in terms of the study design, there was no study design because it was an event that happened and then the data was collected after. If you've got data that was collected, you're treating it as secondary data. There will have been an original study design in most cases. So you'll need to go back and reference where the original paper or report of the methods was written. So if the original study was, say, a national cross-sectional survey, this is where you might put in that you're doing something like a secondary analysis from whatever it is, the national survey on blah, blah, blah. And then you can put in a reference for the primary analysis or for the methodology. So some surveys and studies will actually publish a methodology, or it could be a report of the methodology. So you could put something in there about where the data originally came from. If you're collecting the data yourself, then obviously you can put in how you have designed the study, which might be a survey design. It could be, I don't know, could be anything. You could be actually recruiting people from around the university campus to do something for you for a study. So you can put in your study design there. So we don't really have any sampling and allocation in this case because they were trying to capture everyone, all the passengers anyway, on the Titanic. And there's no allocation to treatments because it's not an experiment. So the variables and measures, we would need to go back to the original source and I want this in black. So list the original variables and how they were collected. So the measures mean how did they get the variables? So this is where I don't actually know how it was done. So we would have to look up how did the historians retrieve the data. There must have been ticket records. What other, I'm not a genealogist, so there's probably other records that they can go through to get this kind of information. Possibly death certificates, media reports from the time, and whatever else they use, but how the stuff was measured, because this gives us an idea about how reliable each of these variables are. The intended data analysis, I'm going to leave that for now because we'll talk about it as we do it. The power and sample size, in this case, it's not relevant for our methods, although we will report our sample size in the results. Because they're trying to retrieve all the records for what happened, there's no need to do a power calculation. And In a lot of cases, studies don't have power calculations. It's probably a topic for a separate video. If you think you need a power calculation, then that might be something to talk to your supervisor about. Or if you have a very specific question, we're welcome to leave a comment to this video. But you do have to have a fairly good idea of what kind of results you're looking for in order to do a power calculation, and they're often not covered in introductory statistics courses, so you may not have seen them before. It doesn't mean you can't do one and you can't understand it. It's just you will have to have a lot of detail about what it is that you're looking at. And in this case, we don't need any ethical clearance because all of this information is in the public domain. If you are getting your data from another source, you may just need to register it. So if you were getting it from the UK Data Archive, I don't know if you need to register that you're doing an analysis. Often for a student project, you won't need to do anything. If you're collecting the data, then you may have gone through an ethics committee if you're involving people, in which case you can say that the study was approved by your ethics committee, but I don't need this here. So then we get on to the results and we get started with our analysis. And this is where we're kind of looking at a couple of things. So I'll delete that because it's not relevant. So we know that we've got historical data and we know that we're interested in all this information about the Titanic. So the first part of the results is really about describing the data. It's not about testing anything or answering our research question. So who are these people in the study and how can we describe them? And this is where we may put in extra variables based on what's available. And we may describe everyone all together, or it's possible we could just do a table, we could do a table split by the groups we want to compare. So this first part is describing the people. It's not about the outcome. So if we go back up to this Pico format here, you will often find if you look in a whole lot of papers that on the first table in the paper in the results, this is specifically in health, it may be different in other disciplines, but you often won't see the outcome on that table because the very first table is about who's the population and who is being compared. So it's really about the people, it's not about the outcome. So in this very first table, it's quite likely that you'll see every other variable except the thing that you're interested in. So you could put the outcome on the table if you want to, but it's really about describing the data. So in here, if we have a think about what we want to say about our data, it may be easier if you set up a table, even if you don't end up using it, and think about the information that you want. I'm going to put a few more options in here. So if we look at this here, I'm interested in comparing passenger class, and my whole population is passengers on the Titanic. So I could describe all the passengers together, but if I'm then going to run an analysis comparing passenger classes, I may want to know, is there anything that could confound the results? So let's say that only men travelled first class. If all the first class passengers are men, then we can't tell if the men happened to survive more, which they didn't, spoiler alert, but we wouldn't know if it was due to passenger class or to their sex. So we're checking, part of this description is to give hints or clues to what might be important when we look at the final analysis. So that's why you'll often see this first table is split up by the groups that we're interested in comparing. If you have more than one thing that you're interested in comparing, you may want to pick one main comparison, or you may want to summarise everyone together. There's no single correct approach for this. If you do have an RCT, you will definitely want to compare your intervention group and your control group, because we need to know that you've got, or you need to know that you've got a fair experiment, and the readers will want to know that you've got a fair experiment before they believe any of the results that you publish. So let's say that we do want to compare the passengers. First class, second class, third class, and then we might want to put in everyone overall. And then we can think about what variables do we want to summarise. We know that we've got sex, we've got age, we've got fare, And we've got the sibling spouses and the parents and children. So I guess we could summarize those as well. Possibly this is where you may want to make a decision about combining it. If you just wanted to know the total number of family that they're traveling with, maybe we would do that as family. The next thing I would do is perhaps think about how you want to summarize these variables before you go into SPSS. So I do want to summarize how many are in each of these. So I'm going to put in an n equals something there. And then also within each class, n equals something. Word is going to capitalize all these n's, but probably they should be lowercase n's. N equals something. And then how are we going to summarize each of these variables? So sex is, let me put this in 2 rows. Male, no, female, and percentage. Age, now I know we've got that in years, so it's scale or continuous. So we could potentially use mean and standard deviation. Let's write all the options in here because we'll have to think about it. So we could use mean and standard deviation. If it's an odd distribution, we might use median and interquartile range or min and max. But it's also possible that we might want to break into categories. And this is a choice that you can make based on your data and whatever you think makes the most sense. Now, the fare is in dollars. I have a feeling that there's going to be some very expensive first class tickets. So I'm going to say, let's put in the median and interquartile range, and maybe we'll even put in the min and the max out of interest. And we also did have some missing data in this one, I'm pretty sure. Not sure if we had missing data for any of these, and we can take the rest of these as we come. So after we've got this set up, that's when it's a good time to go into SPSS and start trying to create some tables. Now, I thought what I would do in this series of videos is rather than go through these options again, I'll show you how to use the custom tables, but you can essentially do them whichever way makes sense for you. That might be a long video if I'm going through it step by step, so I'll record that separately, and then we'll come back and start thinking about the analysis.